Welcome to Slasher Sunday. Hush. Now, of course, I think with this film, you're going to get people who are like, it's not a slasher movie. Technically, yeah, it's like a home invasion, cat and mouse style film, but I don't know. There's enough going. So, like, obviously, what makes a slasher film is all the slashing, right? And this film has some. Right,
It's a little bit of slashing.
It has a couple kills in it that are slasher-esque, but also like another thing that makes a slasher movie is the stalking.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of that going on in here. So we'll count it as one for this. It's just an excuse to do it, to be honest. So I hear your arguments, and you're probably right, but I don't give a shit. So we're just doing it for Slasher Sunday because feel like it.
Okay.
But it has enough slasher elements that I'm like, yeah, it's fine. I mean, I did the Terminator on Slasher Sunday.
Right. And
Right.
most people
definitely
don't
wouldn't consider that
call
a
that
slasher.
a slasher, yeah.
But I 1,000% do.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So that's first thing. Second thing is a very surprising thing here. This is like an completely unavailable film.
Yeah. Right. Well, because it used to be on Netflix.
Netflix.
There's no physical media release for it.
Nope.
And yeah, we had a really hard time finding it.
So yeah, it's not available for rent on VOD. It's not available for purchase on VOD. It's not available on any streaming service. It's not available on any physical media that's like legit, right? So the only way to get this stuff, like to watch this film currently, is to pirate it or buy it from like like an eBay or something from somebody like burning it onto a disc because they have like a pirated copy of it, or they ripped it off of Netflix when it was available on there and threw it on a Blu-ray or a DVD for you to buy. So there's no legal means of watching this currently,
Right.
which is insane to me, like because of Mike Flanagan's name alone.
I wonder if they're like trying to get it released physically somehow, because obviously Mike Flanagan's like partnership with Netflix, like they're parting ways. Like this year he has the House of Usher.
Yeah.
That's like the last like collaborative thing with Netflix and him. So I'm wondering if
Sure, but they're not going to take off Midnight Mass, Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly
you're
Manor.
right. You're
you
right.
know. So yeah, if you go down all of his films from Before I Wake to Gerald's Game, any of the movies that he made with Netflix, well, I shouldn't say Before I Wake he didn't make with Netflix, but Netflix picked it up eventually. But Hush was one of the films that they picked up.
Right, yeah.
And it's just gone. So obviously whatever deal they had expired and they lost the rights to it. But why if no one else has them?
Yeah, it's really weird.
They're like in limbo. And maybe, so something, Scream Factory or whoever needs to get on this and release a physical. And this is why physical will always be superior to me, because you can't just count on that these streaming services are always going to have them on there for you.
Right. Yeah.
People go on there, oh, these movies are just on here, so I'll just watch them on here.
But it's like they might not always be on there, and then you are out of luck.
You are,
Yeah.
and sometimes, like this is kind of a rarer occurrence, but there's straight up no way to get this.
Yeah.
And that's just super lame. So, okay. Hopefully, this video's going to be online for years to come. And hopefully by the time that you're watching this in the future,
You can get a copy.
you'll be
of
like,
it.
this has been on whatever. I own this on Blu-ray
Yeah.
or 4K now. Like, this is outdated discussion. So we'll move on from that. And I hope that's to be rectified soon enough. So the opening of the film has the production company like little logo videos that I've always found to be annoying, but you know, they just want to promote their company. And at least with this one, it plays into the style of the film because typically these production companies have like loud music or whatever sounds with them, and of course, because this woman is deaf, it's completely silent. So I really like the visual storytelling in the opening to let us in on the fact that she's deaf, but not only to do that, but also like really shine a spotlight on how much we take for granted having the ability to hear.
Yeah.
There's so, like, because he hyper fixates on every small little noise and amplifies them, right? She's chopping up things in the kitchen, she's clinking pans, she's moving things around, she's walking around, she's touching things, like everything makes a sound. And you don't really focus on it because you hear shit all day, but when you really, you know, put a spotlight on it and really focus in on it like he is here, it's like all those tiny little things are lost on her. And like, you know, everything makes a sound, everything has a unique sound to it, and she doesn't get to experience any of that stuff, right? And the way the camera like is really like close up on all these things, and it's like chop chop chop, you know, making all this noise, and then it swoops around, and as it does, it starts to slowly like fade, and then when it gets to her ear, it's just completely silent, and then it moves back to everything, and there's nothing. And it's like, oh man, it really illustrates very well like what your disability is. Like it's you're missing out on so much. And I could talk on this subject for quite a while because I have a fascination with like a disability like this, like losing one of your senses or multiple senses. I really am just fascinated by it. But anyway.
Yeah, I really like the opening too, and I think that, like you said, it just does a good job at highlighting like what you know, she's in a different world in some ways than other people. And there's been a few, you know, movies, like horror movies that we've watched that have centered on people who are deaf, and I think that it's a really fascinating like perspective to pursue because, you know, a lot of the time I think it is definitely a theme with these movies where, you know, we are seeing it like it's a disability, it's a handicap, but in the end, most of the time it's like that they use that to their advantage in some way or another. And same thing with if somebody is blind, you know, we've seen a few movies where that's the case too. But I agree with what you said. I think that Mike Flanagan does a great job at just illustrating like how silent the world is for her, and you know, obviously that plays in later on in the film in very large ways. So
yeah. Now you were talking to me about how there was some kind of, we'll say backlash, but I mean, what movie doesn't have backlash these days from some group? And so you were telling me that there's, well, you can tell me again.
There was, I mean, yeah, I think there was a little bit of backlash. I had heard about like some of the deaf community not really appreciating how how that character was portrayed, and you know, of course, there was some upset over the fact that they didn't cast a deaf person in the role, but this role was written specifically for Kate by like Kate and Mike. Like they made this role for her, and they've come out and talked about it and said like there wasn't going to ever be anybody else in this role. Like it was specifically for her to showcase her talents as a leading lady and to like get her like out there. And I understand both sides of it because I think like representation is important. Obviously, like not only having characters that are whatever, but also having actors that match up with those characters play them, because then it adds, you know, it's like not only are you showing them as people like that exist of course in the world, but you're also having the like real life people that they represent like do the job representing them. So I can understand why people would be upset, but I also understand like when you write a script, especially if you're writing it specifically for one person to, you know, play a character, Like, I don't think you necessarily owe it to anybody to cast, like, you know, who the world thinks you should cast. But it is just kind of something that you have to be aware of. And I don't know. I would need to watch more and, like, read more about how they, like, responded to it. But I heard that there was some backlash in that sense.
To which I would say it's called acting.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
like, if you were to take every role and give it to that kind of specific person, you're taking out a large portion of the bit of acting, right? Like, that's where the acting part comes in. She's not deaf. And so she's acting deaf, right? So you're kind of eliminating that. I'm not saying that a deaf person couldn't play this and it wouldn't still work. Of course it would. But when it comes to the acting space, right, the majority of roles that people are cast in, they're not those fucking things.
Right.
That's why it's called acting, right? Like, I'm a hairdresser. I've been a hairdresser for almost 20 fucking years now. And 99% of the time, I watch any hairdressing in movies. It's bullshit. It is not the way hairdressing is done in any way, shape, or form. No one knows how to hold scissors. No one knows how to cut hair. No one knows how to hold a comb. Nobody understands parting. Nobody understands anything. And all that stuff is just like, they're fucking actors.
Yeah. But
right? And I get that it's a different level because it's like a disability and this and that. But is it, to me, because I get that there's probably very few roles that a deaf person can get.
That's
right.
Ultimately
So that's
it.
that is probably the biggest gripe that I can understand.
Yeah.
I
Right,
also
like if you have a
I also
role-
think that if you're like somebody who is, I'll say this, if you're somebody who is so inclined to sit there and bitch about it online and be like, there needs to be this community for this and that, then make the fucking movie. That's how I feel about it. Like, if you got a deaf friend or you're deaf or if you know somebody or you got a deaf community and you're like, well, I don't feel like they're being portrayed correctly and why isn't there enough roles, then fucking make a movie.
Right.
You have that you have that ability. You can get together with people and you can make a movie and you can cast whoever you want in it. And if you don't like how this is portrayed or if you don't like that they're casting people who are deaf in their films, then go make one on your own. It's not some like thing that cannot be done. So for me, it's like, okay, that's what I would say to them is like, if you're really this outraged by it, then go make a movie and represent it correctly. That's it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. And I mean, obviously, like with like big budget, like major Hollywood films, like of course it's hard for most people to break into that industry in general.
But you don't need
like you're
a
saying,
large
though,
budget
that's literally
Hollywood
what
film.
Mike Flanagan and Kate Siegel did. Like they made their own film.
Correct.
So it's the same thing. Like you can definitely still like create the content that you want to see. And that's why I was like, I can see both sides of it because as you said, I think that there are probably limited roles that a deaf person might be playing in like film, in like major Hollywood films. So it can be, frustrating if it's like I'm literally the person for this role and like somebody else is playing it. I think in the context of this film though, it doesn't work as an argument because the film was made only for one person. It wasn't like they had a casting call out,
Correct.
and then
That's a good point.
and we're denying people the role. Like that's where I think the difference comes. And of course, like as you said, like we were talking about acting, like plenty of people who play like different sexualities in film, right? Like you have gay people playing straight people and vice versa. Like, so you don't always have to fit whatever the character is, but like we were saying, it's just that there's certain communities where it's like when they have a role that's for them, they understandably like are upset if somebody who's like literally none of those things gets cast for like nepotism or whatever reason.
I find this to be a modern problem.
I
don't find this to be a problem that we ever really faced before. If you look at like just recently with the Super Mario Brothers movie and Chris Pratt being cast as Mario and people being like, he's not of Italian descent. And it's hilarious. Like literally look at every, like, the main dude who plays Mario in the game, the guy who's been voicing Mario for every single fucking game, is the whitest dude you've ever seen in your goddamn life. Right? And you got Bob Hoskins or whatever from the Mario Brothers movie back with John Leguizamo and whatever. Like, none of these people were Italian.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is just nobody cared. Nobody cared. Nobody ever said anything about that. Right? Mario is a Japanese game.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That they made some, like, stereotypical freaking Italian plumber.
Right.
And then people are like, oh my God, he's not Italian. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a shit. Like, that's just a modern problem. Like, people care so much about that. It's like, if a straight person plays a gay person in a movie, it's like, well, why didn't they just cast a gay guy? It's like, it's fucking acting.
But that's when you have a casting call, it's like, well, that might not have been the best person for the role. Like, ultimately, I think you should consider those factors, of course, but if somebody reads the role better, like, you want the best person for the job, of course, but you don't want to, like...
Sure.
But that's where it's like you have to have a director and, like, a casting agent that are, like, aware of these, like, of representation and of especially of the story and, like, what they're trying to tell. But... you know, it's complicated, I think.
Once again, as I said before, could it be done by a deaf person and maybe it would have been a little more accurate and it would have been cool to see them do it? Sure. But if I take a movie like Milk with Sean Penn, it is very interesting to watch Sean Penn, who's always Mr. Tough Guy, Mr. fucking manly man, Mr. super heterosexual, whatever, play this super, super gay character, Harvey Milk. And like watching like Jonathan from Queer Eye play that character would be like,
well,
like it wouldn't be as interesting or impressive to me because it's such a wildly different character than who you are, right?
Yeah.
And if, you know, I know this is controversial to some people, but like in our opinion, right, gay is not a choice. That's something you're born with, much like deafness or blindness or anything else. And that would be like the same thing to me. Would be like, well, why didn't you just cast a gay person? It's a gay role and there's not enough of them, and why? And it's like, because to me, and I'm totally fine with him casting a gay person. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that there's also that other end of the spectrum, which is like with changing into somebody else for a role. Like when, was it Meryl Streep? Or no, it was Glenn Close. Glenn Close. She was in that movie. I can't even remember what it's called. Most recently, where she played a man. Or Tilda Swinton, obviously playing a man in the Suspiria remake, or any of that stuff. She's not a man. Right. Why not cast a man? Because it's acting. Because it's interesting. Because I said, and she wasn't born that way. And there's plenty of men out there. There's plenty of actor men that were that age and could have probably played it just as well. Why didn't, you know, how many old men get a role these days in Hollywood? Because it's fucking acting. Yeah. Because it's interesting. It's cool to see Tilda Swinton put on this getup and act like a old man when she's a younger woman. I mean, I guess she's like in her 50s now, but she's still much younger than the role and a female. So it's just interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that a lot of actors like to explore different perspectives, so I definitely wouldn't want to deny somebody like the chance to get into somebody else's shoes and like mindset and like delve into a role that way. And I think as far as this movie
I'm going to cut you off really quick because I just want to make one more point. Like, imagine if every role that was specific to something, like somebody who's Cuban, right? Like Tony Montana and freaking Scarface, and like they were like, well, we can't cast Al Pacino because he's not Cuban. Like, we need somebody who's actually Cuban. Like, if we just started only casting roles for like who people are natively, then you really start to disconnect from acting, because those people have to become those people in order to imitate that accent. That's, you know, that their culture, all that stuff. That to me is where acting comes in. It's like, this person isn't, like when Brad Pitt was in Snatch and he's speaking Pocky and he's doing this fucking completely different. They could go to that area and they could find someone who speaks like that and acts like that and put them in the movie. But then Brad Pitt wouldn't have been able to give this incredible, wild, insane performance that's so outside of who he actually is that I would go like, whoa, That, I mean, that what a stretch for him. Like, that's such insane range. And I feel like the range gets limited the closer you constantly try to get to everything, you know, because even like Chadwick Boseman in Black Panther, you know, obviously he died, but like he doesn't have that accent.
Yeah.
Right? And they could have got someone with that accent. Like, why didn't they find somebody from freaking, you know, from that, not obviously Wakanda doesn't exist, but somebody who has that kind of specific accent. I don't know. To me, it's just, you're so limited by that idea of like, we're only gonna cast somebody who fits this specific mold to the character. It's like, that's fine. And you can do that. But saying that's the only option is super limiting to me and really takes away from the craft of acting. So go ahead.
No, I just feel like we've been talking about this for a while in this review, but I was just gonna say, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that as far as this movie goes, like, I don't know, obviously we're not deaf, so we're not like a part of the community, but I thought that they seemed to do a pretty good job at like portraying her, and I liked how she handled things. Like, I think the character is written very smartly, and she does end up using her disadvantage to her advantage in the end, which I really enjoy. Because it just like, it highlights like her strength, you know, and that she's not being held back. Like, she's just as strong and competent as like anybody, even though there's like a killer after her. And yeah, so the opening does a good job at showing that, I think, too, like how competent she is and all that.
But nowadays, they're obviously doing a lot more of this. We watched Coda. All the people in that who were deaf are actually deaf. Mm-hmm. You know, we watch A Quiet Place. The little girl in that who plays the daughter is actually deaf. So, you know, they are doing that. So they can stop bitching, because that seems to be the way of things now. So that's fine. But I don't think that every time that there's a character who's deaf in a movie, trust me, I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of films and thousands of television shows, episodes. I've seen tons of deaf characters over the years. Tons of them. Hundreds, if not thousands of them over the years. There's roles. Okay? And not every single one of those people needed to be actually deaf to play those fucking roles. I'm sorry. There's just no need for that. There's enough roles. It's not like, it's like this is the first. I'm like, oh wow, deaf. I've never seen that in a movie before. This is crazy. They should have cast a deaf person. I mean, it's never been done before. That's not the case. I could think of so many examples off the top of my head of deaf characters in movies. So fucking A, you can get, if you're deaf and you can land a role in a deaf character, that's awesome. And if not, go write it, make it happen. Okay. Yeah, we talked about that for a while, but we've never talked about that before on this channel.
That's fair.
And I think, you know, I wish I could take specific conversations we had and kind of like bookmark them, like, and put them as you know, clickable discussions on the channel.
Yeah,
like clip them out and be like, here's our stance on, you know, casting somebody who isn't a specific to the role, right? And pop that on to a playlist. And because there are discussions, because that's not how this channel's run. We talk about movies individually and not topics individually.
Right, but there's like discussions that we have within certain reviews that like
Sure.
apply to other films.
Where I would love to just be like, and if you want to hear my thoughts on that, go to this video. Because like I don't want to ever talk about this again. Because we just talked about like pretty much everything we could ever talk about with it. But if we do another film that does something like this and people are mad because they cast the wrong person, be like, okay, once again, here we say it, right? How many times have, just since you've been on the channel, how many times have we covered the same topic in a film? Like for the 800th time, where I'm like, oh my God, I know I've said this before.
Yeah, we always have.
But you have to do it because it's you know, people are watching these individual reviews and it becomes very annoying to do over and over and over
very
again.
repetitive.
So that's part of this channel, unfortunately, and part of being a reviewer. Okay, moving on. I actually don't have a lot of notes, so I'm glad that we spent a lot of time talking about that, because you know we'll talk about other things for sure. But I only have half a page of notes. Usually I have at least a full, if not a page and a half. So not a ton here. Another question I've always pondered and has really screwed me up. Now with this one, it is a tad different because she did contract meningitis when she was 13. She lost her ability to hear and to speak. So she had heard before. She did have the ability to speak before. So this is a little different. So her friend does ask her, though, which is like the question that I'm always fascinated by, like, oh, you hear a voice in your head?
Yeah.
But she asks, like, do you hear a kid? Because that was the last time you heard your voice. And she's like, no, I hear my mom. Which I would have think it would have been cool. One, I wouldn't say missed opportunity per se, but I think one cool thing would have been is when she's talking to herself, which is very Gerald's Game. And you had made some kind of talk about like this was a testing ground for Gerald's Game or something. It very much feels like it. And honestly, having watched this, I love the actress in Gerald's Game.
Yes.
But Kate would have been really good for that as well. And but whatever. But she asks her, about the whole thing, and she says like, no, I hear my mom's voice. And what I think would have been cool there is if she could have had a conversation with her mom, and her mom would have had like a very distinct voice. And then when she was talking to herself, she was hearing herself talk, but it's her mom's voice dubbed over her voice. Right? Because it's Kate's voice clearly that she's hearing, and she wouldn't know what she sounds like.
Yeah.
Right? So when she says she hears her mom's voice, and then it isn't her mom's voice that's talking to her as she's going through all the different scenarios like Doctor Strange, she could have had that opportunity to like see herself and then dub in the voice. Because we just watched Insidious 3 last night, and Insidious 3 they recast Lin Shaye's character younger, but they keep Lin Shaye's voice over her voice because Lin has such a distinct voice that you recognize. So it would have been weird for her to have a completely different voice. And the actress did a really great job, as did Lin, like matching up. Yeah. So it felt very authentic to the film. And I think that would have been cool had they been able to use a very distinct voice for her mom's voice to put over her mouth when she was speaking to herself.
Yeah, that would have been neat. I think also like the fact that she says she hears her mom's voice, like a lot of kids will sound like their parents when they get a little older, like depending, right? Like everybody says you and your dad sound exactly alike, which to me, I don't hear because you talk differently, like you have different speaking styles. But you have the same sound to a lot of people. So I think it's kind of cool to think of it like she is like, it's how her voice would have sounded. So she hears it as her mom, but it's still her voice, like just grown up in her head.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
She could have, because she has no lines in this, she could have spoken to her mom on the phone, and she could have portrayed the mom's voice on the phone.
Sure. Yeah, they could have definitely done that.
Right? And then that voice could have crossed over, and then she wouldn't have had to dub anything in.
Yeah.
Or try to match it in like ADR.
Yeah.
She could have just done her own voice, and it would match the voice we heard. She could even give herself like a little accent or something, just so that it's very obvious that it's her mom speaking, but through her head. But visually as her own body. So I don't know. I thought that would have been cool. And the question that I never alluded to is like people who are born deaf or are born blind. What do they hear in their head? Like when they think, do they hear anything? Like, because when I speak in my head, I hear words, but I don't actually. But I think I perceive it as sound. Right? Or like when I visualize something in my head, when I'm like trying to think of something, I will see images. Now, when you're born blind, you have no concept of sight. You have no concept of shapes. You have no concept of anything visually. And I was just talking to my client about this recently, maybe a day or two ago, and I was just weird. I've always been super fascinated by this. If you were born blind, there's absolutely no way to convey to a blind person from birth what sight is and like how it works. You can kind of try to get them there, but they have literally no reference point, and trying to make them understand what a tree looks like or what brown or red is, or anything, shapes. You can make their hands like maybe trace a shape, and maybe they can get some, but they don't know what a line looks like. They don't know, they have no visual representation of anything. So to think of their like perception of what we see, like what they think sight is, blows my mind. Same thing with deaf people, like no idea of what sound is. Like they're like, oh, you know, and how do you even communicate that? It's, I don't know. That shit blows my mind. It really does. But if you're born that way, it's not really as much of a disability because you do not have context, right? It's unfortunately, it's just the world that you're in that makes it a disability because everyone else around you has something you don't.
Right,
and
the
they can
world's
use
not
it to the
designed
advantage. Right,
like,
exactly.
for people in that way most of the time.
Right, but if you were to go to a planet with 6 senses or 7 senses,
yeah,
they would be like, oh my God, how do you live without it? And you're like, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Like, I'm all right. They're like, oh, and if it was some kind of thing that you couldn't get, because like telepathy or telekinesis or something, we can visualize that because it's pretty easy, like hearing voices in your head or moving objects with your mind or something. Like, that's simple. I can obviously convey to you what that's like because we have reference, right? We can have some kind of context to that. But if it was some other sense that we can't, I can't even fathom currently, almost like, you know, like Spider-Man Spidey sense, or something like that. You're like, what? Like, what does that mean? Like, I can't visualize what that would even feel like, except for like when you know someone's behind you and you can feel it. And you're like, what is that? That's like this close to a Spidey sense as possible. But just someone not. But she has a reference point, so I don't know. When she asked her that question, that's stuff to me. I like that that's addressed, and that she asks her, like, do you hear kids' voice? Because I'm super, super fascinated by this stuff. Like, what do blind people see in their head when they like think of their mom, or they think of their favorite this or whatever? Like, do they have visual representations of things in their head? That they created some kind of like visual thing? I'm assuming not, because why would they? But like, how do they think about those things? They just in words, right? And then sounds.
I don't know because I don't know what part of the brain, like, which is connected to sight. Like, if your eyes themselves don't work, does that also mean the part of your brain that is like for visualization doesn't work? Because like, you can tell like somebody, like, this is what a line feels like,
right?
Like, so you could still potentially like have an image in your head if you can feel shapes.
But you don't even know what a line looks like, right? So
but
like,
you could feel what a line looks like. Like, if you show somebody a
feel
if you're like, this is like a straight, flat surface.
You wouldn't see anything because you wouldn't even know to see something. Like vision to you would not even make sense. You'd be like, what do you mean? What is vision? Like, what is sight? What are you saying? It's like, oh, it's a picture. I don't know what a picture is. Like, what's a picture? If you tried to explain sight to someone who's been deaf or blind their whole life, they would just be like, I don't know what you're saying to me. Like, what do you mean? You can make it around easier because you won't run into things because like you can see them coming. You're like, wow, that sounds nice, right? It sounds nice, but I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Okay, moving on. Those would be the last two. That's gonna be the only two things that we talk. Yeah, that we talked about for a long period of time. Sorry, everything else should be super quick. Love that her book is Midnight Mass.
Yeah, that's super cool.
That's a great reference, obviously, to the upcoming show that will have happened by now, obviously, but back then was nothing. I mean, I don't know if he was in like the process.
A concept,
yeah, it's just a total concept, but. Supposedly she wrote it.
Right.
So she should be credited in the show for being the writer. It would be cool if there was like a special thanks to this character's name in the credits. And, you know, as far as like, should she have heard or felt the guy around her in certain instances? I think so. I think when you have that, like, when one sense is lost, other senses become super heightened. So your sense of touch, your sense of smell, whatever you have left become like super, super intense. just to balance it out what you're missing. And the fact that he like comes into the bathroom behind her, and it just takes him like the air blowing out from like his mouth or whatever, blowing on her back. Or like when the girl's at the window, when she's banging on the door, it's more of like, the thing I don't buy is that, and this is something I have a problem with in tons of movies, not just this one.
Yeah.
But there's something called peripheral vision.
Yes.
Right.
Especially when there's
if someone was right here in this window right now, I can guarantee you, even though I'm looking directly here, I can see that window out of the side of my eye right now.
Right.
So if someone was like, right here, and even if I was like this, I would 100% know they were there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that that's kind of like a weird, it's there to show like how, I understand why the scene's there, but I do think that it could have been shot differently where she wouldn't have had the periphery like to see. And then also I do feel like there would have been some feeling like on the floor maybe, or something of like the vibrations, because her friend is like banging and yelling, and but I think you're right that it would have more been like out of the corner of her eye, because she goes back and forth between like her fridge and like, or the sink or whatever. She definitely would have seen something. But at the other scene that you talked about, like in the bathroom, at that point, like I think she's bleeding out. She's like starting to lose consciousness. So for me, I definitely was able to buy that she wouldn't have noticed him until there's like breath on the back of her neck. One of the things too about this film, and that I think also makes it like, for some people, less slashery, and I would kind of agree. I really like the mask. I think the mask is really creepy looking, and I feel like it's just taken off too soon in some ways for me, because...
Not me.
Really? I don't know. I think that I like how it's taken off. Like, I really enjoy that she's writing, like, I didn't see your face and all that. I think that's great. And then he, of course, takes it off and is like, well, now you've seen me. So that's wonderful. I wouldn't change that. I just think that, like, having the faceless, like, killer stalking her and, like, tormenting her a little bit more, I would have liked to see that, because I enjoyed the mask.
Okay, so the reason I disagree is because Mike knew, making this movie, that you're dealing with a film that's like 80 minutes long. 70 minutes of this movie probably has zero dialogue, right? So you're having to, and it's a one location movie. You're asking your audience to watch a deaf girl who doesn't speak, so she doesn't have the ability to hear, but she also doesn't have the ability to speak. So she doesn't talk, she can't hear, and she's running around in the house by herself, and she's not acting against anything when this guy, except for, I'm scared, right? I'm scared, I need to get out of the house, I can't talk about it, right? And we're constantly working around the gimmick of that I don't have, hearing. But then you have the guy, when he reveals himself so that there can be there can be an interaction just visually between them, like of their faces and the emotions of both of them. And right, so like he's throwing that in there to add an extra character, because like Michael Myers isn't much of a character, right? Jason Voorhees isn't much of a character. He's a presence, right? It's a looming threat. It's a presence in the background. It's the shape in the dark. It's the whatever, right? But it's not a character. And so with this guy, when he takes his mask off, then he becomes a character. He's not as much as a character when he's just faceless.
Yeah,
So to me, it's adding an extra character to a movie that it's not going to have a lot going on otherwise. So to be able to have that cat and mouse and to see his features and to see like how much he's enjoying toying with her, and for him to be able to talk to her, right? Because if he's talking through the mask, the way it's designed and everything, it's muffled. And right? So he takes it off, and you see, and it also adds to this point of like, he's not Jason Voorhees under there, right? Like when Michael takes his mask off, he has like the eye, right? And you see that, and he looks all fucked up. And then Jason, obviously his face is like rotted, or before that, it's like he's like a mongoloid or whatever, and Freddy is all burned or whatever. It's just like a completely normal, like a fine looking guy. Like that adds to the creepiness to me, because it's like, oh, it's a scary thing, and then he goes to pull off the mask, and you're like, oh, what is this gonna be? And it's like this normal guy, but he's like sadistic. And so when he takes that mask off, it like removes that element and adds this whole new layer of like, now we're not just going to do the faceless guy who's like creeping in the corners. This is like the dude who lives next door, and now he's like really getting off on the fact that he's antagonizing you.
I understand, like, and I agree with you. I think that obviously is the smart choice to go with the film. I just liked that. I think the mask is really creepy is all, and I just would have liked to see it a little bit more, like not for a ton of it. But I think that you're right, and having somebody that she can bounce off of was really important.
What he could have done with that is he could have had it to be where when he wants to like interact with her like a human, he can take it off. He takes it off, and then when like he feels like he needs to go back into killer mode.
Well, and that's kind of
like can't kill without his mask.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Because he doesn't want people to look at his face while he's killing them or something. Like it could be this thing where it's like he's removing him. There's like one step removed from reality when he throws the mask on, and when he takes it off, it's like he's becoming human again, right? Like he could have played around with that.
Yeah.
In addition to that, with like the whole scene with the girl banging on the way you eliminate that is, if I was to be consulted on that at all I would say is like, why don't you have her like either like washing dishes in an angle to where her back is mostly to the door, and like she's working on the garbage disposal, right, where she's like trying to stuff something down there and it's like stuck and she has it on and it's like right, so there's a lot of vibration coming from here that distracts away from any vibration coming here. Or she's over here making a smoothie and she's got like a blender on, she's holding the top of it and it's like and or she's in her bed and she's masturbating, because then that would make it even more like, because the reason that they do the shower scene, the sex scene, all that stuff, it's not only just for perverts like me who like to see girls naked in sex scenes in movies. It's also because it's vulnerable, right? The shower is vulnerable. The sex scenes are vulnerable. Being naked, people always, liken to vulnerability. And so, like, if she was, like, in her bed, like, in the throes of pleasure as she's, like, masturbating, as her friend is being, because it's contrast, right? It's juxtaposition of like one is in the throes of pleasure and the one's in the throes of like agony, and like her friend's sitting there and like masturbating and like she's like maybe looking at a picture of her boyfriend on the computer, and she's like because this distracts. It's very much she's in her moment, she's got the vibration, she's not gonna hear or feel anything, and you got contrast, right? I like that one, obviously, for my own reasons, but I genuinely think that would have been a really cool scene, because she's like alone out there and she's lonely and she's missing her boyfriend, and then she goes to like have a moment, and because of that her friend dies because she's decided she's gonna go pleasure herself or something. As I said, you could do the garbage disposal, you could do the blender, you could do all these sorts of different things that add vibration and also like concentrate focus. It's like something stuck in here, or like I'm trying to blend this thing, you're putting extra little things in, and then it really distracts. But just kind of washing the dishes lightly and then like banging and crashing, it's in your peripheral and there's a lot of vibrations. I'm just not buying it. So you just tweak it a little bit and it eliminates that issue altogether. Right?
Yeah.
So okay, anyway, getting the text on your phone of pictures of you right now in your house from your own phone is creepy as hell.
Very creepy.
Yeah, the friend killed right in front of her, but she like doesn't even see it. That's horrifying. Her friend must be like, why did I pick a deaf friend? If she wasn't deaf, she would have heard it and been able to let me in. That sucks. Little FYI, as all of you should know by now, because everybody has a smartphone at this point. You cannot use a smartphone with leather gloves on. That's just not a thing. They do this in movies. It drives me crazy. You can get those like special gloves that have like the fingers that are like specifically designed to be, acknowledged by the screen.
Yeah.
But that's not what the case is here. These are 100% obvious leather gloves, and he's touching the phone and it's working. That does not happen. That's not a thing. Oh man, she gets John killed. She doesn't mean to, but that sucks.
Very tragic.
Because it was over. Like John was gonna hit him over the head with that friggin' rock, and that was it. And as he said, like I had like a 2 out of 10 chance of beating you in a fight, and then once like John strangles him, and he's bleeding from the neck, so he's very weakened. And he gets up, and I love that he addresses this like, oh yeah, I had no chance of winning that fight.
Yeah.
Like, good thing I stabbed you in the neck, because I was screwed if you got a hold of me. Shout out to that actor for Battlestar Galactica, probably how he got Katie Sackhoff in Oculus. Yeah, that scene just bums me out. But that neck stab, man, I'm telling you, like, when that happens in movies, it's always like, fuck.
Yeah.
If you got, it's all it takes. It just sucks that we're that fragile. Where you just like, and that's it. You're dead.
Yeah.
There's like nothing you can do about it. Unless you're right next to a hospital that has like a vascular surgeon on standby. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you getting stabbed in the throat like that right here in your artery. Like, dude, you fucking finished. Or right here in the leg.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, you can't open up those arteries, man. It's over for you. And yeah, she uses her writing ability. Obviously, this is foreshadowed earlier in the movie. How do you do that with the ending? She's like, I can conceive of like every possible ending. As I said, like Doctor Strange, going through the possible endings that can come, and there's only one chance.
Yeah, I really like that her character can do that, because I think she's like so analytical, and it does make her a great storyteller, and ultimately like helps her survive. Yeah. I thought that was really cool.
She saves the cat.
Yeah.
Thank God. And in doing so, though, she loses her arm, basically. Her hand is fucked up.
It's crazy, yeah. That's so gnarly when he's stomping on it, and then her fingers all like
wonky.
Yeah.
She's like, hey.
Sad.
It's gnarly, but she still gets the best of him. Mm-hmm. But man, and the fact that, like, yeah, if she could scream, he's like, I can get you, scream, bro.
She'd be screaming.
If she could scream, she would have screamed on that.
Yeah.
Nobody's not going to scream from that. I don't care how tough you are. Your hand's mangled like that. It's just gnarly because he smashes it and then he stomps it and then he's like, move. Dude, the pain is next level. Mm-hmm. And I like that she leaves a description of him and a goodbye note to her family.
Just in case.
He probably would have broke the computer, but just in case he didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know if her description of him is going to really do anything. It gives them some idea, right? So if they do catch a suspect, they have that to compare to. Mm-hmm. But if he gets away, I don't really know how they're going to find him unless he like really screwed up, and because he does it randomly for a reason. Mm-hmm. But it's better than nothing. Yeah, good thing that corkscrew landed on her left side.
Yes, with her good hand.
So she was trying to grab it with that like hand. She was like,
would have been should have been dead.
She would have been definitely dead. And yeah, she uses her disadvantage to her advantage, as Kaylee said, by using loud sound, much like A Quiet Place. You gotta crank up that sound and screw him up and
corkscrew him up.
Corkscrew him right on up. So there you go. There's our discussion on Hush. A good movie that you can't freaking find anymore. It's a shame. If you haven't seen it, try to track it down. It's a very good entry in the Flanagan verse.
Yes, it definitely is.
Showed a lot of promise for him early on.
Yes,
I want to say this
Kate
is
Siegel
like
too. She's
his second film.
After Absentia.
I think this is very
I think it is too.
Maybe Oculus was before this.
Oh wait, no. Well,
I think Oculus is before this.
I think Oculus is before.
So maybe he got this guy from Katie Sackhoff. It's the other way around. Whatever it is. It's a cool movie. What do you guys think about everything we said? I know we said a lot. But definitely let us know in the comments below. And if you're deaf, you can't hear what we're saying anyways. So you can't get upset. We'll have to do one in sign language. They're listening to the freaking subtitles right now. Motherfucker. All right, guys. Bye.